Painting on fabric is pretty much like painting on any other surface, apart from the fact that you use a slightly different medium to work. You use fabric paint. This can be bought separately as a standalone item from art shops, but it's actually, if you work with acrylic and that's what you've got already, and you're going to do quite a lot of it, it's actually more economical if you buy the acrylic and textile medium separately and mix them together. To make fabric paint, you have to mix together half and half acrylic paint and textile medium. Fabric paint can be diluted with water, as can acrylic. You can also mix the colours together, and it's probably a good idea to have a reasonable range so that you can achieve the maximum amount of colours in the rainbow. So perhaps a lemon yellow, a cadmium yellow, a scarlet red and a crimson red, and a cyan blue and a royal blue, also black and white. Then you can achieve pretty much any colour on the spectrum. There are also specialist colours such as gold and silver and bronze, and I think you can probably get fluorescence as well. It's sensible to wash and iron your fabric first before you start, and if you're going to want to wash it in the future, do a test piece. Just paint a little bit of your fabric and iron it on with a hot iron. Put something in between the surface of the fabric and the iron, the hot iron, so a little bit of scrap fabric in between before you iron. Don't use steam, and then just wash and iron the fabric and make sure that it's not going to come out when you wash it. As I've been talking, you've been watching little bits of film of me painting those coats that I showed you quite a while ago. And I'll just give you a little bit of a chat through how I devised and created those designs. So let me just talk you through this. So this is the sketchbook that I produced before I started the Klimt coat. And obviously I based it on Klimt's painting The Kiss, which you'll see in the next couple of pages, which is, let's have a look at that now. There you go. So you're probably quite familiar with that painting. So I was actually going to leave the characters out, and I was just focusing on the designs to reproduce on the coat. So I'd started off by deciding that the front was going to be, the sleeves were going to be based on the background of the whole painting, and I did those first, and then the cuffs were taking the little flowers at the bottom, and then the right hand side of the coat was going to be based on what I saw as the female side, the side that the woman occupies in the painting, and the left hand side was going to be occupied by the position that the male takes in the painting. On the back, there was a bit of an anomaly because obviously I had an extra panel down the back, but I decided to pull out elements predominantly of the female side on that as well, mainly because there was greater variety. I used the swirls on that one, and then in the centre I used these circular devices. I thought about the colour palette, I thought about the lining of the coat, which I'd put in that colour. I already had the coat made up, and off I went. There's a picture of it there on the dummy, with one side painted and one not. So I did all sorts of experiments in trying to decide what I was going to make the coat out of, but in the end I used all these fabrics and bits of what's that stuff called? I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, but in the end I actually ended up painting the whole lot. So I've got some experiments here that I did before I started, and I did one with the pattern on to just make sure that it was going to work. And basically it was a bit of a gamble. Off I went. I also decided to design my own label, which went into the back of the coat, and again I used fabric paint for that, and so I got my own little brand. The second coat was based on a painting called Striped, or Reye, by Vasily Kandinsky, and basically it was this painting of a striped and patterned piece. I had an old 30s coat which fitted the period, because the painting was painted in 1934, and I made a pattern. I actually didn't take this one apart, but I made a pattern from the coat by tracing off the various pieces and producing them into a pattern format, and made up the coat first. And then, because the coat was actually made, I mean, if you look at the back, there are 5 panels of colour really, so what I thought worked quite well was to use each physical sewn panel as a different stripe. And okay, so they weren't uniform, so in that way I had to adapt the pattern, but that was what I based it on, and as usual did a couple of samples before I started. And there are images of the coat as it was taking shape, and very, 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 very meticulously painted, very, very time consuming. So, you know, if you're going to embark on a project that's really quite complicated, you can expect to spend some time on it. The third coat, a complete departure from the neat freak, being really careful about anything. I'd just been to see the Pollock exhibition in Liverpool, and it just inspired me, so I thought I'd check out what raincoats used to look like in the 1950s, and as luck would have it, I had one that was fairly similar, so I based my pattern on that coat. I did a painting called Convergence first, so that was my first coat, and basically what I did was I made the pattern first and made the pieces, and then basically I created a palette of colours that were in the painting. I kind of analysed them a little to see which ones seemed to go on first in the painting itself, and then I tried to replicate that in my own painting. Incredibly, although it seems very easy to do, as if it would be quite straightforward, and it was actually quite difficult to replicate the painting exactly. And this piece here was one where I actually went wrong and put too much blue in, as you can probably see. I used a thick calico for that, and it was far too heavy. So I decided to make another coat using a different painting this time, and a different palette, a different colour palette, and I made it out of much lighter calico. The first was a heavy, the second was a light, and there are the 2 coats there. I started off with yellow buttons, didn't like the yellow, didn't work, so I changed them to grey, and that was pretty much it. After that I went back to a hand painted coat by op artist Victor Vasarely, and in this one I started off by thinking about making it in felt, and started making these patterns out of felt to match this pattern here. I haven't pursued that, to be honest, because it's really time consuming, and it involves a higher level of sewing than I've actually got. So I ended up doing all sorts of bits and pieces, bit of research, and I put little bobbles on the collar. So, but I ended up actually painting most of it. I did a digital version of the painting, which I've actually turned into a repeat pattern here. And those are images of the painting, the coat in progress. And that's the Vasarely Museum in Aix-de-Provence, where there's an awful lot of his work on show. And the coat has ended up down in that neck of the woods with my nephew's little girl, who fell in love with it. So now you've had a bit of an overview, let's get back to your original single tiled pattern and the way that you've cut it up and repositioned it so that you're ready to repeat. So as you can see, I've just drawn my first tile, and so what I need to do now is to just lift the paper and move the next one along until it's in the right position to trace off. There we go. Let's move that to there. There we go. And that should marry up. And then you just repeat that process across and down, matching up your... So here I've got my 4 tiles. I'm going to do this just for the purposes of the demonstration. I've only drawn up 4 tiles and I've transferred it onto layout, or it can be tracing paper, ready to transfer onto my fabric. Now I'm just going to turn this over and trace off the back straight onto my nice clean ironed piece of fabric that I'm going to paint on. But if you had a pattern that needed to be the right way around, it doesn't really matter for this one. If you had a pattern that was going to be the right way around, you would have to go over these pieces with your pencil and then turn that over like that and trace it onto your fabric. My design can be printed either way, so it doesn't really matter. Fix your piece of paper onto your fabric quite securely before you start, otherwise you're going to get some movement and it's not going to trace over properly. And then you can start tracing it onto your fabric, and you can just see that you get this lovely pencil line onto your fabric so that you can work on top of that.